A few months back, I put out a video on arguably the worst trade in NBA history, where the Clippers sent over a plethora of picks and a future superstar in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander to the Oklahoma City Thunder in exchange for Paul George, to pair George, at the time one of the best two-way players in the league, alongside Kawhi Leonard, who was freshly coming off a championship season with the Raptors and one of the best seasons of his career. After the trade, the Clippers were seemingly the team to beat in the NBA, with two top 10 players in the league and a deep bench to get the franchise over the top in winning their first title. While the Thunder, on the other hand, would go down a path of rebuilding, stockpiling their draft capital and young players to build for the future. And wouldn't you know it, oddly enough, just 5 seasons later, the Thunder would be in a better position of contending for a title than the Clippers were, or even have been, throughout the PG and Kawhi tenure. Blown playoff series leads, their top guys not being able to stay healthy, especially when it mattered most in the postseason, and the Clippers were never able to make it out of the West, having just one conference finals appearance to show for it. The Paul George trade obviously became much worse after the Clippers would lose George in free agency, getting nothing for him in return this past summer. But yet, somehow, the trade back in 2019 just got even better for the Thunder than most of us thought would be possible. How, you might ask? Well, let's talk about it. As always, be sure to subscribe. We are nearing 100,000 subs. Let's see if we can get there by the end of the year. I do greatly appreciate the support you guys have shown on the channel over the last 2 years. Now, as I'm sure most of you know by now, it was reported by Shams Charania that Kawhi Leonard, who had already been ruled out for the preseason at the start of training camp, is now expected to be sidelined indefinitely to start the season as he rehabs his right knee that has been giving him problems dating all the way back to last season. No timetable for his return. Could be a couple weeks, could be a couple months. But knowing Kawhi Leonard and his history of injuries throughout his career, this is likely going to be an extended absence. I mean, you can date this all the way back to 2014 when Kawhi tore a ligament in his right hand early in his career. In 2016, he had that right quad issue that kept him sidelined for most of the season. This was back when he was with the Spurs, and there were tensions between the Spurs and Kawhi on whether or not he should in fact come back. Then in 2021, of course, he tore his ACL in his right knee in the playoffs and missed the entire following season. And then in 2023, the torn meniscus in that same knee. Last season, Kawhi was the healthiest he'd ever been and still missed 14 games throughout the year. And look, while Kawhi has been able to bounce back and still play at a high level whenever he has recovered from said injuries over his career, Kawhi is now 33 years old. Recovering at his age from a knee in which he's had 2 surgeries on is not going to be easy. And if you're the Clippers, you've got this guy on a max contract for the next 3 seasons, making $50 million a year, and now there's a real possibility that he's not going to be able to play for a good portion of it, or at least play to the standard that you would expect of a superstar making max money. But the funny thing is, that's not even the biggest issue for the Clippers right now, because you see Kawhi being out for an indefinite amount of time, and the Western Conference being so stacked this season with teams like the Grizzlies and the Rockets most likely making their way out of being in non-play-in territory to into it, there is a world now where it's a possibility that the Clippers miss the play-in entirely, which normally wouldn't be that big of an issue to be headed for the lottery in a year where we're projected to see one of the greatest draft classes in over a decade. But the problem for the Clippers is they owe that pick to the Oklahoma City Thunder, unprotected, which means even if the Clippers get lucky or unlucky, depending on how you look at it, and land the #1 pick in the 2025 draft, they have to ship that over to the Thunder because of the Paul George trade, where the Clippers disregarded the fact that anything can happen in the NBA, especially when it comes to injuries and draft picks being traded so far out into the future, that you should always put some kind of protections on your picks. And look, I know some will say, nah, the Clippers won't be that bad. Even without Kawhi, they're not going to miss the play-in. Have you seen the rest of this roster, though? They don't have Paul George anymore. James Harden is not the James Harden of his Houston Rockets days. He's now 35 years old. And while Harden is still a great player, he's not the type of player that just takes this team of role players to the playoffs. The Clippers are an old team with few young guys that really just aren't that great. Bones Highland, Kobe Brown, Kevin Porter Jr., Kai Jones, like even with Kawhi, I had the Clippers finishing towards the bottom of the play-in at 10th. If Kawhi even misses a month, there is no doubt in my mind they will miss the play-in. And the reason for that is because the margin of error in the Western Conference is so slim. A stretch of bad games, a few losing streaks can make or break your campaign this season. The Warriors won 46 games last year, and they finished 10th in the West. Every game is so critical, and when you have the Grizzlies, who are going to be better, the Rockets, they're also going to be better, the Pelicans, Kings, I would argue they're going to be better as well, the Clippers cannot afford to even have their best player out for more than a month before it sets them too far back in the standings and they're not able to recover and dig themselves out of that hole. It doesn't really get much better for the Clippers either, because it's not like this is the last draft pick they owe to another team. They don't own any of their picks until 2030. They're the oldest team in the league with an aging superstar that is injury prone without much to work with for the future. Blowing it up and starting over for the Clippers doesn't help them because they don't control their picks for another 5 years. And it's not like they would be able to get some crazy haul for Kawhi and James Harden that can put them on a path of rebuilding. No, unfortunately. This latest injury coming out on Kawhi Leonard, which could spell that Kawhi is more or less done, could set this franchise back for years. On the other hand, can you imagine if the Thunder land Cooper Flag, one of the youngest teams in the league, loaded with talent, a treasure trove of draft picks to make more all-in moves if they wanted to, a team that already has a young superstar and finished #1 in the West last season, that team getting another generational talent? Forget about it. That is dynasty written all over it. Now, it's still unlikely that they would actually get the #1 pick because even though the Clippers might fall in the standings without Kawhi, they're not going to be as bad as teams like the Blazers, the Wizards, Nets, Pistons, teams that are clearly trying to tank and lose as many games as possible. So their odds or their percentage of getting a top pick is going to be low overall. But hey, we've seen crazier things happen like we did last year when the Hawks landed the #1 pick with a little over 1% chance of getting it, or the Bulls back in 2008 when they had a 1.7% chance of getting a #1 pick, which netted them Derrick Rose. I mean, it honestly would not be fair. Like, it really wouldn't. But hey, sometimes that happens at the hands of front office incompetence. I want to know what you guys think, though. What do you think this means for the Clippers going forward into this season and where they will ultimately finish in the standings? Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.